Hello, fantasy football fans. Welcome to the Nine Route, the fantasy football show that goes deep to help you win. I'm here, as always, with Mr. Alex Miglio, fellow Football Guys writer. How are you doing tonight, Alex?
You didn't introduce yourself by name. I don't know what your name is, Austin
Oh,
Lee.
oh, you're right. My name is Austin Lee, and I'm sporting these fashionable glasses because, I want to look smarter tonight. I think that's what I'm going for.
You just want to copy me. That's what it is.
It's true. I haven't shaved for about 4 weeks, and this is what I got so far. For those of you listening to the audio version, it's nothing.
He looks like he. For if you've never seen Austin, if this is only audio version, just think of Michael Cera with glasses on, and Michael Cera's ability to grow a beard, which is likely non-existent, and that's Austin Lee.
It's true. I get the comparisons to Michael Cera a lot. Sometimes Jesse Eisenberg. Sometimes that guy who played Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, all the real big, studly, manly men. Those are the guys that people, I just remind them of. It's just a thing,
And I get Zach Galifianakis. That's who people compare me to. So
it's true. He's your brother. Hey, big news! I passed you in the kicker rankings at Fantasy Pros on the season.
I'm sandbagging. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
You just want our listeners to send their kicker questions to me instead of you.
Send all your kicker questions to Austin now.
Oh man, this is going to be a terrible sandbagging contest. I tried really hard to do bad this week, and I couldn't even do it. You're doing better than I am at that.
By the end of the season, I'll be number one again. Who knows?
Yeah, it's probably true. I'm going to roll some dice, and there are my kicker rankings. So we have lots of injuries to cover. We're going to talk about some players to buy low on and sell high on. We've got our typical daily fantasy sports picks of the week, including our stacks of the week that we want to share with you, and we'll answer some Twitter questions. Also, thank you if you've been listening regularly. We've had some great support on Twitter from our friends there. If you feel so inclined, please go and leave us a rating on iTunes. It really helps get the word out and get our podcast showing up on iTunes pages a little bit more. So if you do want to take a second, please go to iTunes and give us a little rating there. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. We've got lots of injuries to cover this week, Alex. Let's start with the Buffalo Bills. They've got issues with both Fred Jackson and C.J. Spiller. C.J. Spiller was put on the IR, designated to return. The earliest he could come back and play is Week 16. So he's pretty much, drop him in redraft. He's not going to be back. And Fred Jackson sounds like he's going to miss a little bit of time, but not nearly the severity that C.J. Spiller is experiencing. What do you think about this backfield, Alex? How long do you think Fred Jackson's going to be out? And do you like Anthony Dixon or Bryce Brown?
Well, for all of 2 seconds, it looked like finally it was C.J. Spiller time in Buffalo. He had that 53-yard run, and he broke his. Fortunate, for Spiller. Hopefully his recovery is smooth. Obviously not coming back this year. Jackson, I was kind of surprised pleasantly later that day to find out that it was only quote unquote a growing strain. I wouldn't want that either. But it was only for.
That sounds really painful. I don't want to experience that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially when it involves things tearing from bone or something. I just kind of ignore the details.
Yeah. But it didn't seem too bad, relatively speaking. So it seems like he'll be back in a couple weeks. He's 33, on the older side. I'm a little hesitant to be optimistic about that 2-week timetable, but way better than what it seemed like on the field. It looked like he thought he was done, and all of a sudden he might be back in a few weeks. So I'm pleasantly surprised by that prognosis, and we'll see.
Yeah, and looking at the running backs that are available in the Bills' offense, Anthony Dixon has been active a lot more than Bryce Brown because Brown hasn't seen hardly any action at all this season. But a lot of fantasy pundits are big on Brown because of what they saw him do in Philly in a few games previously. Do you like the upside of Brown here, or are you like, no, Anthony Dixon's ahead of him on the depth chart? What's your stance on this?
There's a reason Bryce Brown was not active this whole time, and it wasn't because he was good. he'll get action. I think it is going to be a split, actually. I'm not going to say that it's going to be all Anthony Dixon, but I don't really trust either of these guys, especially this week going up against the Jets defense that's been pretty good against the run most weeks. Anthony Dixon, he's that guy that is going to get you 3 yards of carry, and maybe that's who he is. And Brown has the upside, but he's not going to get necessarily the touches that he needs to be effective, I think. So I would say probably 60-40 split for Dixon, and don't start either of them this week.
Yeah, they got the Jets this week, and then they're on the bye next week. So I don't think these guys are really usable until maybe week 10, and that depends on whether Fred Jackson is back or not. So this isn't something to go mining too heavily on the waiver wire, I would say, but a situation to keep your eye on. What about a couple of big receivers we've been talking about in the previous weeks, Calvin Johnson and A.J. Green? It looks like they're getting closer to playing this week. It sounds like maybe they'll both go this week, but it's kind of tough to tell at what capacity. What are you hearing about these two receivers, and if they're active, how confident are you in actually putting them in your starting lineup?
Well, it's interesting because Calvin Johnson he traveled with the team to London, which is a good sign, seemingly. I did see somebody tweeting, I think it was Albert Breer, talking about how that he's one of the league's big stars, and he might just be over there to promote the league more than anything, which could be true. But he's been out for a couple weeks on the mend. The Lions' offense has not been very good while he was out. They did mount that nice comeback last week, but generally speaking, they miss him. So I would expect him to try to go. Unfortunately, if you're making that decision, you have to get up early on Sunday because the game's at 9:30 Eastern time. Woohoo!
Especially if you're on the West Coast like us.
Yeah.
6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, my kids don't even wake up that early nowadays, so I don't know that I'm going to be up for that decision.
Yeah. I said they don't wake me up that early anymore, thank goodness. But
yeah.
holy cow.
Yeah. So I don't know that I would. Obviously, if you're on the East Coast, it's a much better situation. Hopefully, most of you can get up by 9:15 to check out the status. But as far as I would trusting him, if he's a full go at this point, I think you should start him unless you have some really good options.
Yeah, I might have both of these guys outside of my top 10 at receiver if they go, but they'd probably be in the decision-making process with some other wide receiver twos. So unless your team is stacked at receiver, I'm not going to sit these guys. It's just hopefully they've rested these guys up enough knowing that the decoy tactic didn't work and that they'll be more healthy this time than they were before. That's what I'm hoping. I think they're wide receiver twos if they go.
Well, the Bengals need Green more than the Lions need Johnson, I think. The Bengals looked awful last week on offense, and I think that Andy Dalton really misses Green. So I saw somebody tweet about how he said he's going to play this week right after the game because he was so frustrated. So take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, it depends on his toe, but he's going to try to go.
Yeah, and on the Calvin Johnson side, the matchup against Atlanta isn't as tough as Cincinnati playing this divisional game against Baltimore. Man, they could really use A.J. Green in a big way here. So we'll just have to wait and see a little bit on that. But my hunch is they'll probably both go, but not be 100%. What about Trent Richardson? He's got some hamstring issues. It sounds like maybe they're not too serious, but he's actually starting to kind of put together some numbers here in the Indy offense. Is this a guy that you're maybe inserting as a flex option at this point, or are you still like, Trent Richardson, forget it, man?
Well, I think that he still has a stench about him. It's one of those like, well, is he wearing deodorant? Like what is?
He's like a moldy bag of tangerines.
but he's been playing pretty well this season, kind of a bit surprising. He and Ahmad Bradshaw both are doing well, and let's see, where's Richardson's ranked 15th among all running backs this season. Who'd have thunk, right? So obviously some of that has to do with people getting injured, and the guys we expected to be in the top 20 are not in the top 20. But Richardson is kind of consistently getting touches, not getting a ton of touchdowns, but he's getting enough touchdowns to be fantasy relevant, and especially in PPR leagues, I think that he is worthwhile, flex starter.
Yeah, that kind of blows my mind, but you gotta, if it's working, you gotta roll with it, right?
Well, it's the same with Ahmad Bradshaw. I've been dogging him all year. I mentioned, I tweeted this today. Like, his usage has been awful. Like, for a top 10 back, he's getting utilized in less than 20% of fantasy scoring opportunities, as I call them, on the offense, touches and targets, and yet he keeps scoring touchdowns. I mean, he's going to break the record for receiving touchdowns from a running back. The record is 9, and I think he has 6 now. So it's just ridiculous.
That is insane. We'll see if he can keep up that clip. But as when you're in the Colts offense and they're putting up a lot of fantasy numbers, maybe both of these guys are viable starters. Until proven otherwise, I would say.
Well, we've gotten to the point. He's not obviously Peyton Manning, but Andrew Luck he has now made everybody around him fantasy relevant in one way or another. He's got T.Y. Hilton, who is the receiver to own, the guy you're going to start every week. Then there's Reggie Wayne, who could pop off any week, and then you got the running backs, who are doing well because mostly, I would say, because Luck is so dangerous. So I think he's to the point where you have to take that into consideration when drafting him anybody around him in the future.
Yeah, and Dwayne Allen is saying that he's still not quite up to full game speed because he missed a lot of the offseason. So there's a lot of weapons there. And Reggie Wayne, it sounds like he's going to potentially miss some time, but it's a little unclear. So he's a guy to keep an eye out for in terms of injuries if you're counting on Reggie Wayne. Although he hasn't exactly had the strongest of seasons, T.Y. Hilton's the guy you want in this passing offense for sure. Pierre Thomas is out 2 to 3 weeks with a shoulder injury. What do you make of this backfield without Pierre Thomas? We've got Mark Ingram back, Kiri Robinson, and Tavares Cadet. Is there one of these guys that stands out to you, or you're like, whatever, this is a three-headed monster, I need to dodge this thing?
No, I like Mark Ingram. He had a kind of a low total last week on his first week back from injury. But now that Thomas is out, I expect Ingram to be a big part of that offense. He looked great this offseason, the first 2 weeks of the season. So I expect him to be probably the guy you want to start in every week. I think he's a viable RB2 until Pierre Thomas comes back. A guy I like a lot, especially in daily fantasy and PPR leagues, is Tavares Cadet, who I think is going to take over all the pass-catching duties that Thomas had. I mean, he already was catching some passes with Thomas in there while Ingram was out, and now I think Cadet has a really good opportunity at a really low cost.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. He could have a big game with Thomas out. And no injury report would be complete without bringing up RG3
every week.
We're going to bring it up until he's back in. The funny thing is I don't think he's a QB1 anymore, and so, but he's just, he's
like, we might as well be talking about Tim Tebow every week.
That's kind of what I was getting at. So let's make this quick. My hunch is that he's not going to play on Monday Night Football this week. I think it's going to be Colt McCoy, and I think that he starts next week. So if you want to get him on your radar, locked and loaded for Week 9, by all means, I think you're going to want to wait until after their bye and play him against Tampa Bay in Week 11. That's my take. We talked about this a little bit last week. Have you changed your mind on him at all?
Woo, Colt McCoy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Start him. No, don't start him. I think that RG3 is a good pickup. I think that it's obvious that he's going to be the starter when he's healthy at this point. We were a few weeks ago, just a few weeks ago, we were discussing whether Kirk Cousins was going to keep his job, and that's clearly not the case anymore. So, he's not a QB1. I think that he does have upside, though, especially because he can run. So one of those things where you can maximize his matchups, especially in daily fantasy.
Yeah, and while we're talking about it, I'm going to spoil one of your DraftKings picks. Start the Dallas Cowboys defense. Against Colt McCoy, I think this is going to be an ugly game for the Redskins and a plus game for the Cowboys. Let's answer a couple of Twitter questions related to our rankings. You can find our rankings all the time at the9route.com. We've got Alex and I there with our kind of average consensus, courtesy of Fantasy Pros, where we do our rankings. Timothy on Twitter is asking us, pick 2 wide receivers to start in non-PPR. He's got 5 guys here: Andre Holmes, Brandon Cooks, Roddy White, DeAndre Hopkins, and Devontae Adams. Which 2 of these guys stand out to you?
None of these guys are really I'm really high on. I think Brandon Cooks for me. It's a standard league, so he's not as high in standard scoring for me. But he's one of those guys that is going to have big games, and he's kind of assumed the mantle of the typical New Orleans receiver that has big games and then disappears. But I think this week against the Packers, they're going to pass the ball a lot. I think that Cooks is going to have a big game. And maybe even if he doesn't score, I think he's going to catch 7 or 8 passes. And then Roddy White, I think he seems to have regained his form. The Falcons' offense isn't very good, but White was really good last week, and I think that he's going to continue to be, a big part of that offense.
Yeah, and I think what's going on with White is because the offensive line in Atlanta can't protect it all, they're struggling to get the ball downfield to Julio Jones, and White is benefiting in some of that underneath route stuff. I like DeAndre Hopkins a lot from this list. I seem to rank him ahead of Andre Johnson almost every week, and he's the guy that stands out for me that you need to get into your lineup. I like Hopkins and White probably out of these 5 guys, although Cooks is pretty close. In PPR, Cooks would be the guy, but in non-PPR, I'm going Hopkins and White out of these guys.
Yeah, so that's I forgot what I was going to say. I'm just going to take another Twitter question that we didn't write down, so I'm going to ask you. This is from Jill. What do we do with Harvin this week? We actually don't have him in our agenda, so it's a very good question. What do we do with Percy Harvin, who was traded after our show last week, so we couldn't talk about it, and now he is starting I don't know if he's starting, but he's playing for the Jets this week. What do you think?
That's a good question, and I'm surprised since you've been so high on Percy Harvin that you didn't have the inside scoop before last week's episode that he was going to be shifting to another team. I thought that you guys were BFFs or something, but clearly not as much as I thought.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never said anything positive about Percy Harvin ever. I didn't say that he was going to have a huge year.
That must have been somebody. It must have been Marcy Parvin.
That was my arch nemesis Alejandro, who said that.
Curse you, Alejandro. With Percy Harvin, to answer Jill's question, I'm gonna sit on putting him in my starting lineup for a couple of weeks. He's got to learn that offense. He's got to be sort of installed into what they have going on. They'll probably have certain plays and small amount of packages designed specifically for him early on, but I don't think he's going to be super active in this offense for a few weeks. I would play a wait-and-see approach with him. I don't think I even have him in my top 40 at receiver. Eric Decker's the guy you want in this offense this week, and probably even going forward. I think Decker is still the top option in this offense rest of season, although Harvin will hopefully open things up for the whole team a little bit once he's up to speed.
So in other words, Harvin, there's no change in Harvin, the way he was being used in Seattle versus what he's going to be probably in the next couple weeks.
Yeah. I think his value hasn't really changed that much, to be quite honest. I think that he's got a worse quarterback, but eventually he might be used a little more than he was in Seattle, but hopefully he won't get as many penalties thrown by his team when he catches touchdowns this time around.
That's what it was. He had those 3 touchdowns called back, and then all of a sudden, he's stinks in the fantasy realm.
It's true. I think that's the key. If a guy gets a couple of touchdowns called back in a game, he's going to be traded within the next few weeks. So watch out for that. It's a surefire signal. Let's talk about a few of these Week 7 performances that kind of stood out that are impacting our rankings going forward. First off, let's talk about the St. Louis Rams backfield. Trey Mason had 18 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown. Benny Cunningham played more in the sort of passing situations, got several receptions, had 49 total yards and a touchdown. And Zach Stacy had this huge... Oh, no, wait. He had 0 touches.
He had a huge 0. That's what he had.
Yeah, big fat donut. So are you buying Trey Mason here, or do you think it's going to be kind of a weird split between these guys? Who do you like the most going forward?
Well, look, Mason was clearly the best running back in that backfield in terms of running ability. He obviously has some pass protection issues. Sorry, there's a fly here. He has some...
I thought you were just pontificating and gesturing in a Shakespearean way. Add
Yes.
emphasis to what you're saying.
He's got some pass protection issues, which Jeff Fisher was saying kind of kept him off the field at the beginning of the season. And obviously, he's good enough. Good enough. I mean, he's not good, but he's good enough to be on the field. In terms of pass protection now. Fisher, after the game, said, he's going to have, maybe Zach Stacy will get 25 carries. So basically, gave a big FU to fantasy owners when he said that. And so I have no idea what to think.
Yeah, I think him and Arian Foster are in cahoots to try to diss fantasy owners as much as possible this season. Yeah, that was pretty funny. I don't think Zach Stacy's going to get 25 carries. I think he's third in this pecking order. But I think Mason and Cunningham are going to split this pretty evenly depending on whether they're going run heavy in a game or pass heavy in a game. If they're playing from behind, maybe we see more of Cunningham. So I like Trey Mason the most out of these three guys, but I wouldn't count on it being awesome every week. And we'll probably see a little bit of Stacy as well. On the flip side, running back that does seem to have a stranglehold on the job and looks positive going forward, Jerick McKinnon had 19 rushes for 103 yards at Buffalo this past week, and he gets Tampa Bay next, the hapless Tampa Bay defense. Jerick McKinnon, he's got to be like top 15 the rest of the way, right? Or are we buying into this too quickly?
No, I think out of all the running backs that might be available, I think McKinnon is the best one. And I don't know if he's still available at this point in leagues to pick up, but it seems like he has overtaken Matt Asiata. It's the second week in a row that McKinnon has outtouched him by a large margin. And he did a really good job against the Buffalo Bills defense. That's pretty good. The Bills have given up the least fantasy points to running backs this season. McKinnon didn't get in the end zone, but he had 19 rushes for 100 yards. He's the first running back to eclipse 100 yards against the Bills. And I think we're going to see more of that. So I like him a lot.
Yeah, it's not only that he's tops of the depth chart. I mean, he's crushing it in terms of his usage. This isn't a situation where Ronnie Hillman is maybe another guy who's been a popular ad over the past couple of weeks, but I don't expect him to get quite as heavy a usage when, say, maybe Monte Ball comes back. I'm not saying Ball's going to get his job back, but I think there's going to be more of a committee there in Denver eventually long term. I think McKinnon's got this job the rest of the season, barring some kind of weird injury or weird freak thing happening. So Jerick McKinnon is, I guess if you can try to trade for him, it's probably too late at this point. I mean, people know that he's good at this point. But I think he's worth buying, even though people like him a lot, if you can find someone who's not quite as sold on him going forward. Speaking of another running back who's trending upward, Denard Robinson had 22 carries for 125 yards and a touchdown this past week. He seems to be the new number one running back in Jacksonville. Are you buying into this long term? It sounds like Gerhardt may return this week, probably not to reclaiming his starting gig, but with Gerhardt back, does that eat into Robinson's value? Do you think this is the best game Robinson will have all year? What do you think?
I think this might be the best game Denard Robinson has ever in the NFL, but who knows? It was a good game. I pegged him right away. It was kind of a gut, knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, he's the pickup of the week. But looking back at it, the Browns' defense was awful, and then so that was a big part of it. They still have Storm Johnson there, who scored a touchdown. He didn't really have a lot of touches, but and then Gerhardt's coming back, who they spent money on this offseason. And as crappy as he was earlier this season, I still think he's going to get some touches going forward. So I'm not really buying Denard Robinson as a long-term guy.
And this whole rushing attack has been horrible all season with the exception of this one performance. I'm not buying it at all. I would rather have Ronnie Hillman, even though Monte Ball might come back eventually. I'm not buying Robinson. I mean, you could try to get him and sell high on him. If someone is trying to get Robinson from you, by all means, unload the value now. I think he's at peak value now and won't be this high again for the rest of the season. Jimmy Graham played in the game, seemed kind of like a decoy this past week. He got 1 target, 0 catches. This is another situation like Calvin Johnson and A.J. Green. How confident can you be starting him this week at Green Bay?
I tell you what, I foolishly put Jimmy Graham in some lineups last week, in redraft leagues, I did okay in most of them, but one of them I lost by a half point, where I benched Kendall Wright. So
Ooh.
I was totally burned. I think that it was kind of a surprise that he played last week. I should have been more careful, but it was a good surprise in that going forward, I think you can count on him, being okay. This week he's got a pretty good matchup against the Packers, and I'm assuming he's going to have a bigger workload. So I think it's safe to start him. I don't think he's going to have a huge game per se, but much safer than last week.
Yeah, it's interesting with the type of injury he has. He's been having a little bit of trouble sort of lifting his arms over his head, and I think one of his big attributes is being the big guy, the red zone guy, the guy who can go up and get the ball. And I think this injury sort of impedes that ability a bit. I would also put him in my lineup if he's active, which he should be, but I don't feel great about it. If I have another top 10 tight end option, I'd probably swap him out for Graham, but I don't know. That's tough to do. This guy has way too much upside to bench. So I think he's like tight end 7 in my rankings right now, something like that. There's a few guys I like more than him, but get him in your lineup if you got him. Then Ryan Tannehill had a pretty nice performance the past few weeks. He's got 132 rushing yards in the past 3 games, adding a little rushing bonus there in leagues for you guys. And he's got kind of a nice schedule coming up. He's got Jacksonville this week. That's a great matchup. What do you think about Tannehill going forward? Is he a top 12 quarterback the rest of the way?
I think he'll threaten the top 12 the rest of the way. I'm not sure that I'm ready to say that yet, but it has been encouraging the way that the Dolphins have used him the past 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks he had 18 rushing yards. They didn't really look to run him, design runs with him. And the past 3 weeks they've used him in the read option and kind of varied the way that they've just utilized him in general. And he's looked great. He's completing passes at a much better rate for longer average. His yards per attempt is below 7 for the season, but it's 7.5 or so for the past 3 games. So all that to say, I like the way that this is going. I like where this is going, but I want to see more.
Yeah, definitely. As a Dolphins fan, it is exciting to see, and hopefully, Tannehill can take care of the Jaguars this week. Ugh, that would be embarrassing if they lost that.
It would be just like the Dolphins to lose to the Jaguars after crushing the Bears on the road.
Yeah, and Jacksonville's on that hot 1-game win streak, so there's no stopping them. Before we get to a couple more Twitter questions and our DraftKings and FanDuel picks of the week, we wanted to stop and talk about one of our teams that we co-own. It's the Pros vs. Joes League over at FFPC, my FFPC, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. We just talked about Jimmy Graham and Ryan Tannehill. Those are actually 2 of the players on our team. It's a best ball league where it just gives you your best starting lineup every week. You don't have to choose a starting lineup. No in-season moves. You draft 28 players. So, Alex, fill our listeners in as to whether our crazy strategy is panning out so far.
Well, right now we're in second place on the season, which is great, especially considering that at one point it looked like we were totally hosed at running back. Ben Tate was out, David Wilson was gone for the season. We took a flyer on Stephen Hill at the end, and he obviously was cut. By the way, we drafted this about probably 4 weeks before the season started, so it was a little bit early.
It was early August, early August, yeah.
So we missed out on some players that we probably would have changed our strategy a little bit. Vic Ballard's gone for the year, but we've been lucky in that the running backs that have been healthy have been done a decent job, in most weeks, so that they didn't totally sink us. And now we got guys coming back. So Ben Tate came back; he's healthy. Ryan Matthews is coming back. He's another guy. We had Donald Brown as a handcuff. Turns out we should have had Brandon Oliver, but who knew that? So in general, I think our strategy is working. I think taking 2 kickers and 2 defenses, we were kind of dogged for doing that. I think it's worked out fine. We haven't had any issues. Maybe we've lost a few points that we could have had with the 3rd kicker or defense, but I'd rather, given that we had such issues with depth at running back, I'm glad that we have extra players at other positions.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, we've got 3 quarterbacks, 10 running backs, 7 receivers, 4 tight ends, 2 kickers, and 2 defenses. It's a little bit of a unique league. It's a really cool scoring structure. Basically we went very receiver and tight end heavy and then stocked up on mediocre to terrible running backs later. And I think we could have done a better job picking.
We were so excited. You cannot believe how excited we were to take David Wilson in the 9th round of that draft. That's how far back we drafted him. We
Yeah,
we
I think
drafted
it was the 10th round, but it was before he got hurt, and oh man, we were thinking upside.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we're doing well because we drafted some great receivers and tight ends, and it's a lot of fun playing against the Joes, who are the guys that are like the professional high stakes players. They're total sharks. But we're
I
having a
will
good
say
time.
that I'm sure the team that's in first place has been scoring a lot. They're like more than 100 points ahead of us, and it's surprising because I looked at their team today and they have one tight end, and it's Antonio Gates. So it's like they totally got lucky with their tight end pick because you really want to have multiple tight ends in this league because it's 1.5 points per tight end reception, and you can play 2 or 3 even because there's 2 flexes, and they picked one and they're just rocking it right now. RotoExperts.com. Lucky.
Yeah. That tip to them. Lucky jerk, nice. So let's answer a couple more Twitter questions. We've got a couple questions here from Lucas. Thank you for sending your questions, Lucas, and being a fan of the show. He's just asking generally, do you have any buy low or sell high guys? For me, I've got my eye on Rashad Jennings coming back from injury. I think if an owner kind of has lost sight about how great he's been, before he got hurt, that might be a guy you could buy into if you don't need wins in the short term. And I really would recommend selling Shane Vereen. And I know that's crazy because he just had this big game, but if you can get great value for Vereen, like running back 1 value for Vereen, I would dump him now. I said this last week. Whoever has the big game for the Patriots backfield, you want to sell him because the next week it's going to be some other guy or it's not going to be nearly as rosy. That's sort of my take on a couple of guys you can buy low or sell high on. Alex, do you have any guys or any thoughts on those players?
Well, I just happened to write an article for Football Guys that is called The Fantasy Exchange, and it talks about guys you should buy low and sell high on. So, and I literally just published probably 2 hours before we did our show tonight. So if you go to footballguys.com and look for it, it's called The Fantasy Exchange. It's actually free this week. It's not, I'm giving it away because I feel like you guys all need to check it out and see what it's all about. But just to give you a couple of guys that I talked about in the article, I think Keenan Allen is a guy that you could get really cheap. I've seen some guys talk about dropping him, and I think he's a guy that definitely you can pick up on the cheap nowadays. He's getting a ton of targets, just not getting into the end zone, and I think the touchdowns will come for him. A guy that I might sell, a couple of guys that I might sell, really high on. I talked about this last week. I don't know if I talked about it, but I mentioned it last week in this article that Julius Thomas was a good sell high. This week I think DeMarco Murray is a really good option. Now, obviously you want to keep a guy that's scoring, the top scorer in the league and scoring in the top 6 every week in running backs. But if you need some help at another position, DeMarco Murray can bring you 2 top 10 guys feasibly. And if he's going to give you that kind of return, you should do it, especially, he's on pace for 477 touches. He's not going to get there. Whether it's by injury or by reduction of workload, which I hope it's the latter, but, he's also had an injury history, so I might sell high on him.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, which is when you're working on trades or trying to find value to improve your starting lineup, no player should be off limits. If someone's going to give you everything for DeMarco Murray, then you can trade him, even though he's the best player in fantasy. Always be open to anything and explore the options. And I think that's a good point about his injury history and his usage. I get nervous about that as well. I'm not saying dump him for not a good price, but someone's going to give you a lot for that guy. Potentially.
I'll give you in one league I have DeMarco Murray, and I'm trying to trade him because I'm totally hosed at my second running back position. I had Fred Jackson was my second running back, so I was trying to sell him. And mind you, I'm doing pretty well, but I won't bore you with those details. But I was trying to trade him for Andre Ellington and Gio Bernard. This is a standard league, so those guys have a little less value than they would in a PPR league. And there was no dice. The guy didn't want to sell them, but that's the kind of return I'm looking for.
Yeah, and if a guy's stacked at running back like that, and you can pull off a deal like that, and you're hurting at running back too, I could see a move like that being beneficial. That's a good example of a deal I'd be trying to work out. Let's see. Lucas also asks, is it time to bail on Alfred Morris? He only has 136 total yards, no touchdowns in his last 3 games, and he's under 3 yards per carry. Is this the Kirk Cousins curse? Is Colt McCoy and RG3 going to help him out here, or are you like, Alfred Morris is done?
Well, I'll tell you what, he's also in my article as a buy low. So I don't think I would bail on him, but I would buy him if he's really cheap, comes really cheap. Yeah, he's had a really tough 3-game stretch. He's still kind of the bell cow there. You know, they have Roy Halou kind of in the passing game, and they've been behind a lot. Not that they're going to be ahead a lot in the future, but that's part of the problem. Kirk Cousins hasn't been good. You know, I don't know that Colt McCoy's going to cure anything, but when RG3 comes back, he might help things. You know, part of the reason Alfred Morris had such a huge rookie year was because of RG3. And the schedule wasn't very good the last 3 weeks. So there's all this kind of bad confluence of things that has caused Morris to tank the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, I like the idea of buying Morris. I might wait until after this week and buy him right before his bye and then start him against Tampa Bay. This is the theme. Always start your guys against Tampa Bay. So I like Alfred Morris. If you can get him for like outside of top 24 running back value, that seems like a steal to me. I think he's going to turn things around.
If you could trade Denard Robinson for Alfred Morris, do that right away.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Holy cow.
I mean, there might be some people desperate enough to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would do that for sure. I definitely want the alpha side of that. Ha! Let's talk about.
Does anybody get that out there? Please let us know via Twitter. Did anybody get that?
I'm gonna eat the cat. So sorry, random 80s references.
If you don't get that, then it's even funnier because what the heck is Austin talking about?
It's the same no matter what, regardless of whether I'm quoting random things or not. Let's talk about our DraftKings picks. I will give you my stack of the week. My stack of the week did not work out so well last week, but this week I'm feeling good.
I don't remember your stack of the week last week, so
it's better to forget about it.
It didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen.
Did it involve Kirk Cousins?
No, not this. No, not this time. It involved. It was hanging out with Harsey Varvin or whatever his name was.
Well, you know, half the stack worked out.
No. That wasn't the stack I picked. It was the Oakland guys. I thought the Oakland guys were gonna have a big week.
Oh, that's right.
This week, Nick Foles and Jeremy Maclin, I feel like, are both undervalued at DraftKings. Nick Foles is only 6,300. Macklin's only 5,500, and they're going up against Arizona, who yields a lot of passing yards. It's kind of like hard to ignore the fact that both of these guys' prices seem pretty deflated, and they have huge upside. Like, we've seen huge games from these guys. I like starting these guys, maybe not as much in cash games, but in big tournament plays. I like this pairing. Alex, who's your stack of the week?
That's a really good stack of the week. That would have been probably my runner-up stack of the week because I actually have them both as values aside from this whole stack of the week thing. But my stack of the week, I really like Drew Brees at 8,100. It's not cheap, but for an elite-type quarterback going up against Green Bay in what figures to be a shootout, they're in New Orleans, so that helps for Brees. 8,100 is a good price. And none of the receivers, not Jimmy Graham, but Travaris Cadet. I talked about him earlier.
He's a running back.
Yeah, but he's going to catch a lot of passes. I bet you, I think he's going to probably get 6 or 7 targets this week and catch 3 or 4 passes. And, he's kind of a sleeper to have a pretty big game, I think, in PPR leagues. And he's only 3,000. He's dirt cheap. That's the cheapest you can get over at DraftKings. So, you offset the price of Breeze by getting Cadet, I think. And you can also maybe stack him with Cooks, but this was, I only picked one guy.
Yeah, I think that's good. I like that, and I like the value of the bottom-priced running back there. We both like Ryan Tannehill at Jacksonville this week. He's only 6,700 at DraftKings. We talked about him a little bit already. I like Matthew Stafford at 6,500. At Atlanta, quote unquote, in London. I think that
hot
is
London.
A good matchup. Yeah, exactly. Hot London. Exactly. It's going to be hot over there for sure.
Yeah.
I like him even if Johnson, isn't at full speed or doesn't play. I think that against Atlanta, that matchup play is a good one for Stafford at that price.
I would rather have the running backs in the Detroit backfield against Atlanta. That Atlanta defense has just given up so many points to running backs.
Joique Bell is a really good play this week. I like him a lot.
Yeah, and one guy I like at quarterback, going back to the position we were talking about, at quarterback, going back to the position we were talking about, was Tony Romo. He's not cheap either at 7,400, but he's going up against Washington, and I think he's going to have a big game.
Yeah, and then kicking over to running back a little bit. I mean, Andre Ellington, to me, he's only 6,600 this week. His price keeps eking up at DraftKings each week, but I still feel like he's just a little bit undervalued in PPR here at DraftKings. So I like.
Well, he had a big game last week. He just gave up, got vultured twice. If he had hit on last week, he was my top running back. If he had hit one of those touchdowns, he would have been in the top 5. If he had hit both of them, then he would have by far been the best running back last week. So yeah, at that price point, it's still worthwhile grabbing him at 6,600. A guy I like at running back who's expensive, but he's the most expensive running back, but I think he's worth it, is Matt Forte, 8,800. Which is not, it's not into the 9,000s, but he's just a workhorse. You're going to get points with Forte. That's the thing. A lot of the guys we talk about with value, like Travash Cadet I talked about earlier, you don't really know what you're going to get out of them, so you're kind of gambling. But with Forte, he's going to put up a ton of points every week, and he's going up against New England, who's given up a lot of points.
Yeah, and I heard this fact on the 06010 podcast today that he leads the league in receptions. Not just running backs receptions. He leads the league in receptions. So in a PPR league, why aren't you putting Forte in your lineup? He's expensive, but you can find other values like this Cadet play or something like that to make him to get him into your lineup. Another guy that could help you get a guy like Forte into your lineup is taking a gamble on Cordero Patterson. There's a theme here. Start you guys against Tampa Bay.
Yes.
Patterson's worth the risk this week. I like this pick a lot at only 3,300. It may not pan out, but he's so dirt cheap and has huge talent against a terrible defense.
Well, somebody was I was tweeting about Patterson's matchup this week, and somebody was saying, well, he needs to get the ball thrown to him first, which is true. But have you, my counter was like, have you seen the Buccaneers tackle? So all he needs is one, right, and then to get to the end zone. Not that you should really gamble that way, but I expect him to probably get a few more targets than he usually does, this week. Just in general, I think the passing game is going to be really good with Teddy Bridgewater, who is a pretty good value himself, more so at FanDuel, which we'll talk about later. But, I think that Patterson could break one or two long runs or, runs after the catch this week.
Yeah, I like that. And, you've got Zach Ertz on your list, only 3,200. He's going up against Arizona. I think that's a good pick at tight end over at DraftKings as well. How about we go to the FanDuel picks that you've lined up here? We've got a couple of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, and a kicker.
I'm going to defer to you now at kicker. You pick a kicker.
Yeah. I like Mason Crosby. Because
wait a minute, you stole mine.
He's only $5,000.
Yeah. Basically, I look at all the kickers at FanDuel that are 5,000, and I pick one of them. That's what I do.
Seems like a good deal.
Yeah. So, going back a little bit, QB. Actually, we talked about your stack of the week over at DraftKings. I'd say at FanDuel you can get Foles and Macklin. Macklin's a little expensive, but I like that stack this week. It's 8,200 for Foles and 8,000 for Macklin. And again, the Cardinals are giving up a lot of passing yards, so I think that's a great stack. I really like Carson Palmer over at FanDuel. Sigmund Bloom was tweeting about him earlier today about how he's kind of all in on that with maybe a Michael Floyd in a stack. And Palmer's only 7,400. I didn't look at Floyd. And then Teddy Bridgewater, talked about him against Tampa Bay. If you're going to take a flyer on a really cheap quarterback, he's only 5,400. And so if you stack him with Cordero Patterson or Greg Jennings, who I like also, who's 5,500, you've got a lot of money to spend elsewhere. So I like that. And at running back, we talked about Cadet. He's cheap there. Also Kyrie Robinson. I keep mispronouncing his name. They're 53 and 5,100. But Ben Tate I like a lot this week against Oakland, who's giving up a lot of fantasy points against running backs. Tate had a down week last week, and he's only 7,000. And I'm not letting you talk, so go ahead.
No, it's all good. I like the Tate pick there. I mean, that's a run-heavy offense, and Oakland is terrible against the run. I'm not a big fan of the Robinson pick for New Orleans, but I like the Cadet pick. I think with Ingram back in the fold, I don't know how much action Robinson's going to get. But if you're going to go cheap on quarterback, I think Bridgewater's the guy to gamble on because what's the theme? He's playing against Tampa Bay. Now that I've said this 1,000 times, Tampa Bay is going to totally destroy them.
Yeah, they're Minnesota's going to score 8 points this week somehow, and
8 points, 2 field goals and a safety.
Yes, helping nobody in the fantasy realm. Yes,
yeah, exactly. I love it.
A guy this week. We talked about Jimmy Graham and how he's a little bit tough to start, but he's only 7,000 at draft FanDuel. And that's pretty cheap for him at FanDuel. I think that for a guy with his upside, it's worth taking a gamble at that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I also like you've got Curse on here from Seattle. This is a guy that I really went heavy in on last week at DraftKings. I was like, I know that either Baldwin or Curse.
You went the wrong way.
I know, I went the wrong way. But the thing was, he was $200 cheaper than Baldwin, and I was like, $3,200, $3,300. Ooh, I'm gonna go with Curse, and boy, that was so close, but completely wrong.
Yeah, if you had just gone with Baldwin, it would have been so much better. I don't blame you though, because Curse he's the kind of guy that's a home run swing. He's got he's a deep threat. He's the upside. He's now the number 2 receiver. So. That's why I like him this week. I think that going up against who are they playing? Carolina, who's not very good against. Yeah, the Panthers are giving up a ton of points to opposing wide receivers. I think I really like Curse, and he's only 4,900. So if you're going to take a flyer, a cheap one, Curse is pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that about wraps it up. Oh, you got any other ones you wanted to touch on, or you're good? You're good. Okay.
No, I'm good. Just go to footballguys.com and check out that article. It's free. Go check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And you can find all our stuff at footballguys.com. You can find everything having to do with this podcast over at the9route.com. Alex also writes over at Bleacher Report. Go check out his stuff over there. Any final joke or something to send people off with? Alex is shaking his head no. He's got to go. We've hit up against the wall. So subscribe to the 9 Route on iTunes or on Stitcher. You can get Alex on Twitter at Alex Miglio, and you can get me, Austin Lee. Now you're...
No. Your microphone is totally screwing up right now, and you don't even know it. So I'm just going to say go to the9route.com and check it out, and you can check us out on Twitter at the9route. Do those things on top of going to footballguys.com and checking out our article. So I'm sorry to cut you off, Austin. I just I wanted people to hear that.
No, that's awesome. Sorry.
I sound like Ultron right now. So I'm gonna sign us off. For Austin Lee, I'm Alex Miglio. You can find me on Twitter, Alex Miglio, AlexMiglio. You can find Austin on Twitter at Austin NFL. I never do this, so I'm just gonna say good night. Good night.
Good night. Sorry about technical difficulties and microphones. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Bye.